Two men jumped out of an airplane over the Blue Ridge Mountains. No ejection seats, just a canopy slid back by hand. A stand into 500 miles an hour of open air and a leap, timed to miss the tail. One of them landed safely in a valley. The other fell through a pine tree and hit a rock. Their airplane kept flying without them, then crashed into a mountainside so remote that nobody found it until a search plane spotted a wing wedged in the treetops. 60 years later, it's still there. This is the story of that wreck, the era around it, and it turns out, a story a lot closer to my own family than expected when I started walking. 8:40 in the morning. At Blue Ridge elevation, the trail at Humpback Rocks sits in the high 60s, a rare gift for a Virginia summer. I've hiked this trail before, first in my 20s, later with my kids, but it's been about 10 years since I was last here. Yet my legs still remember the opening climb, the steep scramble that gets your heart going before you've even warmed up. Being early, there were only a few other hikers around. I fell into a groove and made the peak in 30 minutes, a little faster than the time posted on the park sign. Not bad, I'll admit, for 56. I felt good enough to push on to the real destination. I'd read about a T-28 crash site somewhere on this mountain, and I'd done my homework. Dropped 2 markers on a map before I ever left the house. One where I'd need to leave the trail, one for the wreck itself. My plan had been to approach from the south, starting near the Humpback Rocks picnic area, but the weather was good, so instead I kept walking south along the Appalachian Trail from the summit towards my waypoint from the north. I didn't pass another soul on that stretch. One blog I'd read researching this hike had a piece of advice. Come in the fall and thank me later. They were right. I was there in the thick of summer instead, tromping through dense understory, eyes on a GPS arrow instead of a trail. I left the marked path near my first waypoint and dropped east, downslope into the forest. The cover was heavy, the descent steep. Slow, careful going, checking my phone every few steps to try and stay online. Then, through the trees, maybe 20 feet away, I saw it. The tail section, still standing, dull oxidized grey aluminum against forest green. The wreckage was more contained than I expected, spread across a relatively tight area of the slope. I could make out the radial engine half swallowed by the ground, wing sections and scattered structure around it. 60 years of forest and it was all exactly where it landed. My phone, standing in the middle of this wilderness graveyard. I had full cell signal. First call was to my wife, just to let her know I'd made it safely, that I was standing at the site. Second was a WhatsApp video call to my father. My father flew helicopters in the 1960s. A tour of Vietnam with the Marine Corps first, then he transitioned into Air America, the CIA's clandestine airline, and flew extensively over Laos. 2 aircraft mostly, the Sikorsky UH-34D Choctaw, and later the Bell Huey, the UH-1D. And here's a coincidence I didn't expect. That T-28 in front of me and my father's Choctaw helicopter, different aircraft, different missions, decades apart in some ways, ran on the exact same engine, a Wright R-1820 Cyclone radial, the very engine I'd just been standing over, half swallowed by the ground. He flew several rescue missions himself, going in after downed American airmen. I showed him the wreckage, told him what I knew at the time, which I'll admit wasn't much, just that it was a T-28 and that the pilots had bailed out. I didn't know the whole story yet. That would take some digging when I got home. But even that fragment was enough. My father's voice from the same restless era, bridging the distance between that quiet hillside in Virginia and the skies he used to fly on the other side of the world. Here's what the record shows. May 1st, 1964. A North American T-28 Trojan, a trainer aircraft, departs Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, bound for Memphis, Tennessee. Routine cross-country flight, log in monthly proficiency hours for senior command staff. At the controls, 2 experienced U.S. Marine Corps officers. Colonel Joe Warren, 42, up front, Colonel Robert Bryson, 43, in the rear cockpit. Cruising between 7,000 and 8,000 feet over the Blue Ridge, the engine's oil pressure drops, suddenly, catastrophically. In a radial engine like this one, that's not a warning sign. That's the beginning of the end. Within minutes, the engine seizes completely. No thrust, no power. And over the Blue Ridge Mountains, socked in by thick continuous cloud deck, tops around 6,000 feet, no way to clear the ridge line, no airfield within reach. Colonel Warren makes the call: abandon the aircraft. This version of the T-28 had no ejection seats, so this is manual, physical. Slide back the heavy canopy by hand, stand up into 500-mile-an-hour slipstream, time your leap over the side to clear the tail section, or the tail section takes you with it. Both men clear the aircraft. Both parachutes open. Both men fall through a blind wall of cloud with no idea what's waiting underneath. And then their stories split. Colonel Warren comes down in the Rockfish Valley, relatively flat ground, a hard landing but a safe one. Colonel Bryson isn't as lucky. He drifts towards the rugged slopes of Humpback Mountain itself. His parachute snags in a tall pine tree, holds for a moment, then tears loose. He falls through the branches and slams into a rock formation in a valley the locals call McLean's Hollow. Dazed, badly bruised, alone in a mountain terrain with no idea where his co-pilot came down. And then he starts walking. Miles of dense undergrowth, injured, until he reaches a homestead. The resident, a local preacher, takes him in, and the two of them set out together to find a working telephone. They reach the Nelson County Sheriff's Department. The word goes out. Later that night, in the town of Livingston, Virginia, the two colonels are reunited, alive, both of them. They call home, they call the military, and then, finally, someone starts looking for the airplane. Unpiloted, the T-28 smashes into the side of Humpback Mountain, about 3,450 feet elevation. No one witnesses it. The terrain is so rugged that it isn't found on the ground at all. It's spotted from the air when a search crew sees a piece of wing wedged high in the forest canopy. Unlike most military crash sites, there was no attempt to recover the wreckage due to the dense forest canopy and rugged terrain. Today, the engine, the fuselage, the landing gear, most of it's still exactly where it came to rest on the eastern slope of Humpback Mountain. Here's the part that stayed with me the longest. This crash, May 1st, 1964, wasn't an act of war, no enemy fire, no shoot-down, just an old radial engine failing at altitude. But 3 weeks later, May 22nd, 1964, on the other side of the planet, that same aircraft type was being formally committed to a new war. In Laos, the T-28, specifically modified variant called the T-28 Nomad, became part of a secret aviation program run by the CIA and Air America, my dad's outfit. To understand why it was secret, you have to go back 2 years, to July 23rd, 1962. 14 nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, China, and North Vietnam, signed the Geneva Accords, officially the Declaration on the Neutrality of Laos. On paper, it took Laos off the board entirely. No foreign troops, no foreign bases, no foreign military operations from anyone on Laotian soil. North Vietnam signed it and then quietly ignored it. While the ink was still drying, Hanoi began building a supply route through eastern Laos to move troops and material into South Vietnam, a network that would become the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail. Laos wasn't neutral at all. It was becoming a battlefield in a war nobody was allowed to admit was happening there. And because the United States had signed the same treaty, the American military was officially barred from operating inside Laos, which meant when a pilot went down over that jungle, there was no Air Force rescue helicopter allowed to come get him. That job fell to Air America itself, a civilian airline on paper, funded and operated by the CIA in practice, free to do what the US military legally couldn't. But here's where it gets close to home. Helicopter pilots like my father took on primary responsibility for search and rescue, flying completely unarmed Sikorsky UH-34D helicopters into some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. No guns, no armor, just a crew and a hoist. Because these helicopters carried nothing to defend themselves with, they flew escorted by Royal Lao Douglas T-28 Trojans, flown by Air America pilots, armed and configured to suppress enemy ground fire when the rescue happened underneath them. An unarmed helicopter going in low, an armed T-28 circling above it, keeping the ground quiet. 2 aircraft, 1 mission, and my father was flying one half of it. And because the T-28 started life as a harmless trainer, the very same kind that just crashed in Virginia, it made the perfect cover. A secret-owned air proprietary, deniable on paper, even when it was doing the work of a warplane. My father flew with Air America from 1964 to 1971, almost all of it over Laos. His helicopters weren't just running rescues, they were part of the lifeline of the Hmong themselves, ferrying both fighters and refugees, families caught in a war most Americans back home didn't even know their country was fighting. Many of those Hmong forces fought under General Vang Pao, right along the same Ho Chi Minh Trail corridor North Vietnam had built in defiance of the treaty 2 years before. My father confirmed something for me after the hike. He had a colleague in Laos, a pilot named Jim Ryan. Jim flew the T-28 out there. He also flew C-130s and the C-123K, heavier transport work. The T-28's job, Dad told me, wasn't just combat. It flew air cover, it was even used for carrier landing practice. A trainer, a bomber, a rescue escort, whatever the mission needed that day. Anything, anywhere, anytime, professionally. Jim's war caught up with him eventually. In 1972, flying a C-123, he took a hit from an 85mm anti-aircraft shell. It destroyed his leg below the knee. He survived, and months later on a prosthetic leg went back to flying. But Dad loves telling a story about him from that time. Jim came to visit my family in Barbados during his recuperation, swimming every day to build the leg back up. One afternoon, they took a boat out to Sandy Lane, the beach by the island's premier hotel. Jim swam ashore ahead of everyone, hopped up onto the sand and started shouting, "Shark! Shark!" The beach cleared out in about 10 seconds flat. That's who was flying these airplanes. Men who lost pieces of themselves out there and kept going anyway, with a sense of humor intact. Somewhere in that overlap, a mechanical failure over a quiet Virginia ridge and a covert war starting up 3 weeks later on the other side of the world is the actual shape of 1964. Not one dramatic headline, just the same aircraft living 2 completely different lives in 2 completely different theaters. Our 2 dates, May 1st in Virginia, May 22nd in Laos, weren't the only ones on the calendar that year. January 4th, an Alitalia DC-8, Pope Paul VI becomes the first pope to fly commercial for an official visit. A moment of grace. January 13th, a B-52 Stratofortress loses its tail in a winter storm over Maryland. 2 nuclear bombs are recovered from the wreckage. A narrow miss on American soil. January 28th, an unarmed T-39 Saberliner, a training jet, much like our T-28, strays into East German airspace after a suspected radio failure. Soviet MiGs shoot it down. All 3 crew are killed. December 24th, a Flying Tiger Line cargo plane goes down in the ridges of San Bruno, California. The entire crew is lost on Christmas Eve. 4 more moments, layered on top of our own 2. Some of them made the history books. One of them almost didn't make it past a hillside and a forgotten blog post. But every single one of them was flown by somebody's father, somebody's son. The sky in 1964 wasn't just Virginia and Laos. It was thin ice everywhere you looked. And every one of those aircraft is still connected to right now, if you're willing to go looking. History gets remembered differently, depending on which side of the story you're standing on. The 3 men lost aboard that T-39 over East Germany are remembered formally. In 1998, after the Iron Curtain came down, the German community of Vogelsberg in Thuringia built them a memorial. Colonel Warren and Colonel Bryson survived their fall, so there's no memorial for them. Just a wreckage on a hill site that most hikers will never find, and a story that exists as scattered wreckage on a blog post or two, and now a podcast. No plaque, no ceremony, just the forest slowly taking the machine back. A simple summer hike turned into something bigger than I expected. Not just a piece of aviation history, but a thread that ran straight back to my own father and a war he flew in that I had only ever heard about secondhand. Here's the last thing I'll tell you. That Air America base in Thailand my father flew out of was outside the town of Udorn. That's where I first lived. My family was in Thailand for just over 7 years. I was born there and stayed for the last 2 before we moved back to Barbados. I don't remember any of it, obviously, but standing on that hillside, looking at that engine that shared its design with the helicopter that carried my father over Laos, I wasn't just looking at history anymore. I was looking at the reason I exist at all. The jagged fragments lying on that Shenandoah mountainside are more than scrap metal. They're a direct line back to 1964, to 2 men who survived a fall nobody should walk away from. An aircraft type that 3 weeks later was already flying into a war on the other side of the world, and as it turns out, to my own father, thousands of miles from that Virginia hillside, keeping the same kind of engine turning over the jungles of Laos. So next time you're out on your own local trail, ask yourself how many silent witnesses you're walking past, and what stories they're still trying to tell.